Welcome everyone to the Nerd Journey podcast. Our goal is to help technical professionals accelerate their career progression, increase their job satisfaction, and bring you the advice we wish had been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Corti, at NetworkNerd_.
We both work in the tech industry with backgrounds in IT operations and sales engineering. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to career enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
We also wanted to mention that our second site, graph.nerd-journey.com, is also live. That's the knowledge graph and linked notes version of our main page's show notes that we developed to make it easier to explore our episodes, guests, and topics.
Hey everybody, we are here with episode 221, and if you missed episode 220, John was telling us all about what it was like to get fired and the things that he did to prepare himself for what was next, process what had happened. And at the end of that episode, John, you said something about you did land a position, and that's what I want to hear about today. Tell us about how that came to be, and how did you decide? What are some of the things you did to land the plane?
The things, like I would say, to keep in mind is that, you know, when one's coming off of a shock, like being informed that you're fired effectively, you know, there's a lot of processing to do. I think that I mentioned the first thing that happened to me was that I was, you know, maybe an advantage I had was that I was, you know, fairly emotionally even. I didn't have a massive emotional shock that it wasn't, I guess, how would I put it? It wasn't an existential crisis for me. So I was able to process the question, what's next, fairly quickly and easily. And the answer to that was really, I think, something that I went over. You know, I have a couple options. One is maybe get into management. So, you know, I've been a sales engineer for quite a while now. Is managing a team of sales engineers something that I want to do, something that I think that I could be good at? I thought I can be good at it, so it's something that I should consider doing.
And don't forget saying smart manager things. You have to learn how to do that.
Maybe the first thing I need to do is create a document of generic manager responses that may or may not be helpful in this specific situation to the individual contributor. That's something that needs to happen, right?
Yes.
So that's one path, right? Is potentially becoming a sales engineering manager. Another is expanding into a new or different area of technology, something different. Something that is pushing my boundaries as far as adopting a new technology or getting interested in something, you know, brand new, but still maintain the same sales engineering role. For example, getting into a little bit deeper into analytics and business intelligence and, you know, maybe even machine learning and artificial intelligence. That might be one path. Maybe an expansion into different industries than I've been covering. Kind of doing the same thing, but being very industry specific. Maybe being a sales engineer for ERP solutions or healthcare solutions or something very industry specific.
I think this is interesting and important to point out that you weren't trying to just, quote, turn over a new leaf and go into a totally different thing you had never done. It's not like a 180-degree change and you're going to go and start a media company called Nerd Journey.
Well, even that wouldn't be a 180-degree turn, right? Like I already have invested the time and effort into spending that up. But, you know, it is something that I did consider. I was like, well, maybe Nerd Journey could be like a completely different direction and, you know, brand new career. Could we turn this into a business? I would say that I probably discarded that early on just because we didn't get into it to become a business. So I don't know, the idea of monetizing something that we were giving away through, I don't know, add-on services, like a paid coaching service. I think that that isn't really what I was, had set myself up for. It was something that I thought, maybe not that. So I had examples of all of those options, right? I guess another option would be move to another hyperscaler like Amazon or Azure. I considered all of those options. Fortunately for me, actually before the layoff even happened, I had a former manager reach out to me and ask if I was interested in applying for a sales engineering manager role in the Bay Area. So it would be staying in the same location, but, taking a step into a management role. That was already in the forefront. It was a manager that I told, hey, I'll always take a call from you. And it just heated up a little bit more, when I was laid off from the position that I had. Obviously, I'm more interested when I don't have a job than when I do.
Of course. Now, had you told this former manager of yours that you had a goal to maybe be a manager yourself one day, or did they see it in you like, John, I think you have the capabilities to do this?
I absolutely had mentioned it to her.
Okay.
Yeah. It was something that we had discussed while I reported to her. It wasn't anything intensive that I had prepared for, or we had, in-depth career development discussions about while I worked for her, but it was something that I brought up. So when she had that slot come up, that conversation that we had previously had, surfaced, and she thought, where is John now? Oh, he's still in the Bay Area. This would work. So that's the position at Nutanix that I applied for. There's some things that I had to consider when coming to a company like Nutanix. First of all, Nutanix, kind of competes with VMware, which is a company that I had worked for previously. And I still have, great relationships with the people that I worked with at VMware, that are in this, specific geographic area that I'd be covering. It's a little bit uncomfortable to think like, hey, we might be competing against each other, but that's something to consider, where I'll have overlap with those people, and will we be competing against each other, and would that cause friction with personal relationships? I think that wasn't something that I foresaw happening. I still have, really good relationships with the people that I work with, and we touch base fairly frequently. And, as soon as, I thought, hey, this is the direction I'm going to go, I let them know. So they already knew that I was headed in that direction. I think that it's always understood that, hey, this might happen. And I think it would be different if I was a direct seller selling against those former colleagues. But in this situation, I was applying for a job which was a sales engineering manager, right? So I'd be assisting people who might be in that competition, but not being the one directly involved in the opportunity. So, one step away. Another thing to keep in mind was that, it was potentially a cut to the high end of the income that I was making. Well, first of all, I was working for a company that was paying at the upper end of the pay band for individual contributors at Google Cloud. So almost any company that I was going to work for after that, was potentially a pay cut.
I remember Don Jones saying that a lower level manager makes more than an individual contributor just normally by default.
Maybe a higher base salary, right? Very possible. That is the case. But then, the variable portion of that manager's salary probably just isn't going to go as high, right? So in sales engineering, we are incentivized to help our sales partners sell more, but we are not the primary commissioned people on any account. So we participate a little bit if, there's a successful sales cycle. What that tends to look like is, maybe we make 70% or 75% of our salary as a base, with 30 or 25% of that, on target earnings, meaning if you hit the quota, being variable. So if you have a high enough base, then, you're fairly comfortable no matter what happens. But say you have a manager with a higher base pay than an individual contributor. If the individual contributor sells 300% of their quota, they're going to earn like 3 times their variable pay, right? So instead of, it would be, say, 70 plus 3 times 30, right? So 70 plus 90. So 160% of their total salary, compared to the manager in that situation who has not just, that one sales territory's quota, but all of the other quotas added together. Or in my case, 2 different entire sales managers, like pool of quotas. So call it, somewhere between 10 to 12 people's quotas all added together. So if one person overachieves at 300%, you'd need everybody else to overachieve at that same level. So, it's very possible for the individual contributors in that situation to be making more than the manager. Now, if they're all overachieving, then the manager is going to be overachieving, right? But it's also something I think that Don Jones said, your success is out of your own hands. It is in the hands of the people who are on your team. And you don't know, I don't remember who said this, you don't know if any given day is a good day until maybe weeks or even months later.
That was definitely Don Jones.
Yeah.
And I think you could also look at the compensation piece in terms of companies that may have some sort of measure by objective bonus structuring where the individual contributor can achieve a certain level and then the manager can achieve a certain level. So that makes sense to me. Absolutely.
Yeah, that might be the case for, even if it's a management by objective, right? If you have people who are reporting to you and maybe there's a management objective that says, oh, the individuals, like, if they complete 2 of these trainings, then they meet their target. And if they complete 3 of them, then they, will call that 110% of like some kind of additional bonus structure, right? But then the manager has the target for the entire team added together, right? So if it's 10 people, then they would need 20 trainings to be completed in order to be on target. And they wouldn't, there's a sliding scale of, additional people doing additional trainings above and beyond that.
Right. It could be certifications or something. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah. So that's one aspect of it. I think there's a mixture of maturity in the specific situation with different levels of tenure for all of the salespeople and the sales managers. It wasn't 2 sales managers that had, 10 years with a company who were, consistently hitting 150%. So, I wasn't walking into kind of a gimme situation. Like, candidly, if that was a situation, like, why would they need to fill the position? They would have presumably somebody who is high performing who wouldn't want to walk away from that position, kind of already in the slot. Opportunity comes with a little bit of uncertainty. And there's a flip side to that too, right? It's the opportunity to grow something. So, helping a team mature and fill out and helping with strategy, helping them with execution. So, all those things like kind of came together. I would say that the sales engineering team that would have been reporting to me in this situation, like, it was filled with, for the most part, tenured, high-performing individuals. So that was not a concern. And then, again, I happened to take this position. So over time, I got to learn, just how high quality and how high-performing they all were. It was just kind of an ideal situation with that part of it in mind. It looked like there were, high points, some possible areas to grow, but ultimately it wasn't anything that ruled out the opportunity. I've had experience in the industry, which was Nutanix's primary solution area, hyper-converged infrastructure, which is, the virtualization and storage virtualization all in a single appliance, but not specifically with Nutanix. I had experience with VMware's version of that, and then at Google Cloud, of course, compute and storage are abstracted, concepts. Just not directly with Nutanix. It just didn't seem to be that much of an issue. I felt, I could, spin up on it fairly quickly. And then, of course, the job of the sales engineering manager isn't to be the best technical person on the team. I looked at the people that were on the team and I thought to myself, well, I'm always going to be in, 10th place, say, because they all had a head start on me, and my main goal wasn't to become the best, technical person on the team. I was relying on them to be, individually excellent and me to support them. Again, that didn't seem to be a barrier.
Yeah, because it's not the super ninja deep technical person that should necessarily become the manager. It doesn't mean they couldn't be, but
right.
It's not required.
Well, there's a separate kind of semi-title to that, and that is the tech lead. So a team might have a tech lead, which is, the person who's in charge of being that ultimate form of escalation on the team, the technical escalation on the team if the team is having problems. And that's different from the manager. It's just a different job. So, let me take a step back. Like I had, this attitude of like, hey, there's no single perfect opportunity for me. I have to be open to any number of positions at any number of companies. So I wanted to keep an open mind. I applied for the sales engineering management position. I applied for several others. I felt like there's any number of opportunities that I could do well at. It just so happened that Nutanix moved the fastest. I take that back. There was one company who got back to me and said, hey, we have like probably better fits fairly quickly. And I went, yeah, that's true. I was kind of thinking that as well. Like it was a, kind of a very different technology. So, expansion into a new area of technology for me. And it wasn't something that I was necessarily extremely passionate about. So I thought maybe it wasn't a good fit.
Here's a question, John.
Yeah.
If you were to look at your applications on the whole, the jobs you applied for, do you feel like you ended up getting into more that were management focused, individual contributor focused, or was it just a mix of the two based on what was out there?
I would say of the jobs that I applied for, it was 25% sales engineering management and 75% sales engineering individual contributor.
Okay. That's a good context point. Thank you.
Yeah. It just depended on what was available and what was open. And I also had kind of an open mind. I got aggressive. There were some interesting companies that didn't have open positions. And I went to LinkedIn and I found who was in charge of sales engineering at that organization. And I said, hey, do you have open positions? Are you looking for sales engineering leadership? Or if it was a smaller company, I said, are you looking for, high-level sales engineers that you might want to eventually become sales engineering managers as the company expanded and needed like a level of frontline management? I had nothing to lose, essentially, especially if it was interesting companies with interesting products and interesting industries.
Sure.
And I got a couple of responses that way with companies that didn't have open positions, but still responded, in a positive way. Yeah, let us think about that. We're doing our planning right now, but this might be a really good fit, and let's have an informal conversation about that.
Maybe you'll cover this later, but in the interviews you did that were individual contributor focused, where you progressed through some process, did you communicate an intent of, hey, I'd like to progress into management, or was that not discussed?
No, because that wasn't, I guess what I kind of thought about was, this is a chance for me to apply to different roles, but the roles that I was applying to, I wanted to be, extremely interesting for their own sake.
So all in. Yeah.
Yeah, especially the smaller companies, where I was being aggressive and saying, hey, I don't actually necessarily see more than, say 3 or 4 sales engineers and, covering the entire world. I was a little bit more thinking you might be looking for high-level sales engineers who would eventually become sales engineering managers. And I opened the conversation that way. But I would never apply for a sales engineering position and tell them up front, actually, what I really want is a sales engineering management position. If I would apply for a sales engineering management position if that's what I wanted. And if they had an interesting sales engineering position, then it needed to be interesting as a sales engineering position in its own right. And I think that that was part of me being open to multiple paths, right? I wasn't just saying, hey, sales engineering management path is the one that I want, and everything I'm going to do from now on is focused on achieving that. So any new position that I take is really just a step on the ladder to become a sales engineering manager. That was not the attitude that I had. The attitude I had was there's an opportunity to do many interesting things. I think I mentioned there were 3,500 open positions with sales engineer or systems engineer in the title that were in the sales part of the industry. So it just looked like there were tons of opportunities out there, and I didn't need to worry. And there was, again, going back to what I said, there's no single perfect opportunity. There's a spectrum of opportunities covering a bunch of different roles, maybe some of them hybrid. Somebody, in an early stage startup might need a sales engineer who is also tech marketing and also a little bit of pure sales too, right? So there's a bunch of different things that could happen out there.
I really like the openness. I feel like you're channeling Jason Langer, because I remember him saying, yeah, if I was to go to my next opportunity, it was an individual contributor, that's totally fine. And if it was a manager, it's totally fine. Maybe
part of that comes from the specific jobs and industry that we happen to be in terms of sales engineering, where a high-performing sales engineer might be out earning the manager that they work for. It's very, very possible. Like I said, the specific, situation where the sales engineer individual contributor, it helps their salesperson to 300% of quota. That doesn't mean that the sales engineering manager is hitting 300% of quota, because they're carrying the quota of the entire sales sub-region or region. It moves the needle, but you can out earn a manager, right? So it wasn't about, hey, I need to become a manager because I want to earn more money. It might mean earning less money. Yeah, I didn't feel like management was a requirement. It was just interesting. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I love to hear about the why and what went through your head about it. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So it ended up that Nutanix moved the fastest, advancing me to a round of interviews and kind of finalizing that and expressing strong interest, talking more and more about like what the match would be like, why they liked me, what the challenges of the position were, what the upsides of the opportunity were, in very candid terms, very, very quickly, really before any of the other opportunities that I was talking to got, past like initial screening stages or, maybe one interview. Before any of them really could progress, I had an offer in hand. Any of the other opportunities progressed, I had an offer in hand, and it, looked good, and that's the direction I went in. But maybe I should back up and say what that actual interview process looked like, because, I borrowed fairly heavily from some of the people that we've interviewed about, what it looks like to interview for a management position. I did some research. I knew I had strengths and weaknesses going into it. I think you're the king of talking about adjacencies, Nick. And so that was something that I thought about a lot, was the adjacencies that I had for this sales engineering management position. At Google Cloud, I had been asked to do a lot of interviewing. So I'd probably done somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, 30, less than 50 interviews, but probably more than 20.
And you've done a few others on the air over the past 4 or 5 years.
That's true. That's true. Although I would say that interviewing to probe for technical skills and sales skills is a very specific type of interview, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're absolutely, I shouldn't discount the fact that doing these podcast episodes and interviewing guests and trying to tease out stories and understand what's going on, that is part of it. You're absolutely correct, and it's not something that I really thought about going into it, and I should have. So I did not say, hey, I have podcast interviewing experience.
It's all good, man.
When you're the kind of lead sales engineer, you are sometimes in charge of holding a team of extended technical professionals accountable on an opportunity. If you have several overlays all working in tandem,
maybe a product manager who's, talking about roadmap, and then maybe a, somebody from tech marketing who's, doing like a one-to-many session for a large group at a single company. You're coordinating a lot of resources, and you need accountability from that extended team. So it's something that I had done before without role power, right? All I had was relationship power in those situations. So, it's an experience I had of asking for things and relying on the relationship to get it done rather than having the title of manager of that person in order to get it done.
Yeah, John's calm about it now, but I mean, he would drop the hammer on these people totally if they didn't do what he asked.
Well, it's tough to drop the hammer when you're trying to preserve the relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's true being a manager too. When the person reports to you, I mean, I suppose there's, screaming managers who are willing to sacrifice the relationship, between the two people to underline the importance of something, but that sounds like a failed relationship already.
That sounds like an anger management problem. That's what
yeah,
that
very
sounds like.
possibly that too. At Google Cloud, I'd done peer reviews, and that was a very important part of being an individual contributor, was to help assess the peers that you had and do that in an open and honest way, not just all the good things that they're doing, but the areas that people have to grow into as well. Things that they can do to become even better at what they're doing, to point those out so they have an opportunity to grow. I'd also managed an out-of-college SE on her first assignment. So I was basically the frontline manager, acted as the frontline manager for that individual, and had to do a performance review at the end of the engagement and help her grow from, all theory to an actual experience on the ground SE. And then I had a bunch of mentorship activity, right? Where I'd tried to mentor people and help them grow and give advice, career-based, company-based, and all those things kind of rolled up to be my adjacencies. When I applied to other positions, I had a different list of adjacencies. Maybe I hadn't used or sold their product directly, but I had sold or used products similar or adjacent to, those products. Oh, for example, Google Cloud had a data warehouse product called BigQuery, and I was applying for a sales engineering management position at Snowflake, which was basically a competitor, but also a company that ran on top of Google Cloud. So did I have Snowflake experience? No, but I had BigQuery experience. I knew all the use cases and had, again, adjacencies, not the direct product. So then, I had to examine the weaknesses that I had, maybe areas where really here's the areas that I would absolutely need to grow into a sales engineering management position. Lack of experience, doing that actual exact job. I didn't have any experience at firing somebody or managing them out of the position or out of the company, helping them to understand that maybe this was a bad match for them. It's not something that I'd ever done before. I hadn't been a hiring manager, although I had conducted interviews. There's a difference between being on the interviewing team or one of the people who's responsible for conducting an interview with a candidate and being the person who's ultimately responsible for making the call and saying, I think that we should hire this person and not these other two.
Are you making a recommendation as part of that interview team? Like if you interview 5 different people for the same job, do you say, hey, I actually think this person is the best candidate in the pool, or might you not actually meet with everyone in the pool?
Other companies might do it that way, but Google Cloud did not. At Google Cloud, it was an extended pool, right? The attitude was we're looking for any number of people who might be qualified to fill this title. And maybe they are able to fill it at different levels. Like here's a person who would be able to fill a senior version of that title. Here's a person who would be able to fill a standard version of that title. Here's a person who'd be able to fill the junior version of that title. But
really you're trying to evaluate whether there is a good fit between that person and this position. That's kind of how it was. Generally, the problem was, that Google had super high standards, and maybe people didn't understand how to do the type of interview that Google was looking at, which was, fairly data intensive. And as a result, not a whole lot of people were passing through. So they wanted the maximum number of people possible to pass through the process honestly and successfully, right? Because maybe they had 10 open slots, but generally when they ran a hiring, cycle, they could only find 6 people who were qualified. So they kind of had to hold the slots open and continuously have people cycling through, because they, slots were opening up faster than they were able to find qualified candidates. And then they fired 12,000 people. So I don't know how those two things go together, but they did.
Yeah, I heard that impacted some folks.
Right. At any rate, that's kind of how I viewed my lack of experience, the things the challenges that I would have in the areas I would have to grow into a position. And I did that for, again, all the positions that I was applying for. If it was an Azure cloud sales engineering position, I would have a lot of growing to do as far as the specific product mix that Azure had, because they didn't have the exact same products that Google Cloud had. They had their own versions and different focuses from Google Cloud. Again, just where I would have to grow for any given position that I was applying for. And then I would say the next thing was, how would I succeed? At that point, when I was evaluating what do I have to do to succeed at this position, I was, more narrowly focused on Nutanix's sales engineering management position, because that's where it was. It was the kind of advanced interview process, and nobody else had advanced me to that process yet. So, I borrowed the manager tools kind of guidance on a 30, 60, 90-day plan. In order to succeed, I'm going to have to watch and learn for 30 days. There's just things that I don't have context on in any given job. If I'm going to make tweaks and small changes, that probably, I probably need to do that after the 30-day mark, right? I just don't have enough context to know why things are a certain way. If I'm going to make larger changes, I need to have as much context as possible. And I probably shouldn't do that until after the 60-day mark, into the 90-day area. And even then, be conservative and don't try to change a bunch of things all at once. It's really important to know why things are the way they are. And 30 to 90 days is maybe, even fairly aggressive to think that you have enough context to know why things are the way they are and what needs to change. That was pretty important to keep in mind. And it was kind of similar for individual contributor roles too, right? There's probably in the first 30 days a lot of spin up that needs to be done on the specific technology and the specific company. And then, in the 30 to 60 day time frame, you need to get, a little bit more into, hey, how am I going to work with the specific opportunities of specific sales territory, the specific salesperson that I'm matched up with. And, that 60 to 90 day, now I'm planning for more long-term success. How am I going to exceed and outperform? And surprise, surprise, all of those topics came up. Those topics came up, talking to the hiring manager. I talked to both sales managers that I'd be covering. I talked to the VP of sales. I talked to other sales engineering managers, at least one sales engineering manager who would be a peer of mine. And then the VP of sales engineers who my director reported to. Those are all stops along the way and points in time where I was talking to people about my strengths and my weaknesses, where I had a lot of experience and where I had areas to grow and how I plan to address those areas to grow.
And how did they take the adjacent experience? Did they feel like that was a solid, oh yeah, that's about the same, or that's not the same? Or
I think so, because I wasn't saying I've done this, and it's the exact same thing. When you talk about adjacent experience, you can't say oh, I've done this thing and it is exactly the same as what I would be doing. You have to say, I've done this thing and it shares some overlap with the thing that you're talking about. So I haven't done that exactly, but I've done this thing which is like it. I think the classic example which you have pointed out to me is, when you're in a help desk position or a support position as a, technical point of escalation, and somebody's trying to tell you that this is what they want done. I want my entire system replaced. And you have to sell them on the idea that no, there is an evaluation that needs to happen, and maybe even a better solution that's less disruptive than replacing the entire system that might get them a better result. Is that the exact same thing as selling a product for money? It is not, but it has a lot of overlap and shares a lot of skills with that technical sales process. Gaining the person's trust, understanding what the root problem is, seeing whether the portfolio of solutions that you have can solve that problem, and can you do it in a maybe even better than what the person thinks that they need. So again, is it exactly the same? No, but it is like it. It is adjacent to it, and there's overlap. And they accepted that, right? They knew that I would be a first-time manager. I wasn't hiding that. In fact, it was one of the things that I was asking them about. Hey, what is the situation where you think it makes sense to have a first-time manager? And, when is it a challenge? When would you never hire a first-time manager? Is this one of those situations? It probably wasn't, because you're already talking to me, but, it's something that I wanted to know.
That's a great question to ask a hiring team. I never thought about that one.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain profiles that you're probably ruling out. Here's the profile that I fit into, and what situations would you think would disqualify that profile? Because it's not about me personally, but here's where I am in my career. Here's the move that I'm trying to make. There's probably 5 of me out there. What would cause you to rule out this profile or not consider this type of person, this category of person? Because that helps you understand the situation that you'd be going into, right? Maybe an answer to that would be, oh, I probably wouldn't hire a first-time SE manager if the people that SE manager had to cover were very early first-time sales managers. It probably makes sense to have a mix of experience and new. And that's understandable. So I actually had other questions, right? I think some of my standard questions, which I've talked about before, like what's the culture? I'm looking for a situation where I'd be working with really smart people who are smart in different ways than I am, who have different experiences and different backgrounds than mine, so they can cover for my blind spots and I can cover for theirs. And I'm also looking for a good culture, where growth is emphasized and mistakes are tolerated because, there's always going to be mistakes, right? Can you have a blameless system where everybody grows based on everybody else's mistakes? What are the people in the team like? What are their personalities like? So talking to those sales managers is pretty important. Are we going to have a personality fit, or are we going to be clashing all the time? And it doesn't need to be perfect, because nobody's ever, a perfect meshing fit, but can we partner together? Would that make sense? What is the path to success for this role? What's the baseline? Where is it starting? And then what are the actions that need to happen in order to get success, in broad strokes? And then a specific question that I had was kind of one, at least for the Nutanix opportunity, was, hey, this is a business that is selling an infrastructure solution. How does the business become more of a strategic vendor and not just one selling infrastructure? Is there a plan to go up the stack? And actually I'd answered that question ahead of time, for myself. I had Kubernetes solutions and database management solutions. So going up the stack and becoming more of a platform company was definitely in the cards. So I thought that was a good sign. But I wanted to hear about maybe the things that weren't on the website, because I can do the research, but, maybe these people can tell me, oh yeah, that's actually, not a real solution, or yeah, nobody's using that. So, it's severely lacking. Those would have been red flags that if I'd heard that, I would have said, maybe this isn't the right solution, right? But I didn't hear that. Like that's not what the response was.
It sounds like you had some really good questions for the hiring teams. I think that's a great way to model for our listeners the importance of making sure you ask questions. Whether you're the only applicant or you're one of 1,000 applicants, bring some questions. Bring some questions that help you determine if it's the right thing.
Yeah, and I will say, I was in a privileged position, and I always want to acknowledge that. I had the privilege of being financially secure because of my planning. I had, probably over a year of savings that I could ride out without making compromises in my lifestyle. I guess when I say that, making house payments and car payments, right? And as well as putting food on the table and paying for health insurance, probably would cut out vacations. All the luxury yacht rentals that I was doing probably would have had to have gone by the wayside. That's a joke, by the way, just to be clear. No luxury yacht rentals for John.
That's good to know. You're not that fancy.
Right. Ultimately, I was in that privileged position, so I could make sure that this position, which I would be a first-time manager in, was something that I felt like it was within my control to execute and be successful in. That's what I wanted, right? It would be a situation where if I did the right things, if I, applied myself, I could be successful. And that's what I felt like it was my job to figure out if that were true or not. And I felt like it was that position. And so when the offer was on the table, we talked about, compensation package and benefits and all of those things. And, I came to a position where I was like, yeah, this is going to be a good fit for me, all things considered. So I accepted the position. And, as of this date, I think I just finished week 7, rolling into week 8, and have yet to make any large changes. Then maybe we should stop here unless you have additional follow-ups for me. I feel like I've been monologuing.
What was the most off-the-wall question you asked somebody in the interview process that they didn't expect?
I wanted to know how important swing dancing was to them as a skill.
As part of a diversity and inclusion initiative?
Was there a swing dancing team?
Is there an internal swing dancing support group or meetup group? Yeah.
No.
That's good.
I didn't ask that.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I don't think that I didn't feel like I asked anything off the wall. I felt like most of my questions were pretty down the middle, but I asked them in multiple ways to make sure that I was getting an answer that made sense. I was hearing the same answer in, multiple ways, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I love the triangulation, John. And I would really love to hear your impressions of being a first-time manager so far. But wait, before you answer, let's don't do that today. Just a reminder, we'd like people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White @BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy @NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.